What's up guys? Today let's talk about the brand new C192 chassis AMG GT and why I think it is a massive step back for AMG. Now, for any of this to actually make sense, let's get some context for what actually has been going on with Mercedes to get why we've got these two models here. So, before with the current date, let's go back maybe 5 years or so, we had the R231 SL, which started production in 2013 and ran all the way till just now. Then we had the C217 and A217 S-Class Coupe and Convertible, which were very successful in terms of how they looked and how they felt, but not with sales. The sales were not that great. Then, of course, we had the very successful C190 SLS-derived AMG GT, GTS, GTC, GTR, 5 Series, all of them. And all those models, Mercedes thought were just too much. So the R231 SL and the S-Class Coupe did not sell very well, especially towards the end of their life cycles. The SL was very outdated and just archaic. Roadster sales have been going down for the last 10 years, in fact probably more than that. And the S-Class Coupe just was not a great seller compared to its sedan counterpart. So Mercedes decided, let's just get rid of all of these chassis and let's combine them into essentially one. So AMG developed one new chassis and they then used it for two different cars. Now, AMG will tell you that the new GT is its own thing, but it truly is an SL with a hard top. Now, of course, there's more changes than just that. There's a lot more than just that. But the reality is they are more or less very similar. Now, the benefits of having the three models beforehand were that the SL could focus on being more of a sort of casual beach cruiser with a convertible experience with a hard top that folds down. Now, unfortunately, it was just so outdated that people didn't really want it. It was more of an older person car towards the end of its life cycle. The S-Class Coupe was just the epitome of luxury in a two-door format, the typical Mercedes peerless coupe fashion, especially with convertible option. There was even a Maybach version of that, which did pretty well in terms of what it looked like and all that. The AMG GT was extremely successful. In terms of AMG supercar, sports car, they over the years have been going from the SLR, which was extremely expensive when it came out, didn't do very well in sales, to the SLS, which was more of a success, but still pretty expensive, and it wasn't really what Mercedes wanted in terms of sales either. So we came to the AMG GT, which was SLS derived, but it was more of a sports car targeted at the 911. That being said, you had a V8 that was front mid-mounted, which a 911 didn't have, and you offered a completely different exhaust, a different driving experience, but it was still its own thing. But it was definitely squared at the 911. And there were lots of features of the first-gen GT that made it unique, that made it special in the AMG lineup that kind of warranted its existence. Otherwise, you know, we could have an E-Class Coupe AMG that would have fulfilled pretty much the same thing. We'll talk more about that later. So the benefits of having three different chassis was that you could fulfill three different purposes altogether, and there was no true overlap, although you could argue that potentially some S-Class Coupe and convertible buyers would be cross-shopping with an SL, but not really an AMG GT. So current day, we now have the new R232 SL as well as the C192 GT, and the end product is now that we have a sportier SL and a softer GT, which puts them closer than ever. We've also lost the AMG GT Roadster, which is pretty much just the new SL. So now it's hard to say if either of the two models are truly good at what they were intended for, and if they can even match or even come close to the luxury that was offered with the S-Class Coupe and Convertible. I'm pretty skeptical, although I haven't driven any of them, so I really can't say. I've only driven the AMG GTC of the last generation of all these models here. But it'll be interesting to see how the sales go. Before we start talking about all the negatives of the new AMG GT, at least more negative than what I've already been saying, let's talk about the potential positives to platform sharing with the SL. One positive is, okay, we're reducing costs, which should not be a problem for a multi-billion-dollar company. Anyways, pro number two is that, okay, we now have a more versatile GT that now has 4MATIC, and it has more practicality with back seats, kind of like a 911. And we have just a more friendly and maybe more comfortable chassis. I don't know, these all seem like cons to me if I'm being completely honest, because it's a GT, it's an AMG GT. Now, some may argue that the new GT is more of a grand tourer than the previous one was, but the reality is it's a sports car, and now it's not really much of a sports car. So one of the biggest issues that people have already been talking about with the new AMG GT is how much it weighs. It weighs around 4,400 pounds, and that's without any hybridization whatsoever. That's just how it is in its raw format, which To be fair, it does have 4MATIC, which is all-wheel drive in AMG speak, but that adds a lot of weight. It's completely shared with the SL. But what I find interesting is actually it's heavier than the SL by a slight margin, but it's almost 800 pounds heavier than the outgoing AMG GT. 800 pounds. And to explain why this may be the case, there's a few reasons for that. One of which is more obvious, that it's based on the SL platform, which is supposed to accommodate a folding roof, and the whole layout's a bit different to reinforce for a stiffer chassis with a folded roof, which the AMG GT pretty much carries on. Another reason is technology and luxury elements. The new GT has a lot more technology with it and a lot more luxurious features out of an S-Class per se. For example, massaging seats and whatnot, which the old one did not have. That all adds weight. But the biggest reason this car is so much heavier than its predecessor can be explained by my beautiful drawings over here. Yes, I know. Just bear with me, okay? Down below we have the first generation AMG GT, the C190 platform, with the M177 V8 mounted directly behind the front axle, making this car a front mid-engine. This power is then sent directly to the back of the car via a carbon fiber torque tube to a DCT transaxle, which then torque vector to either wheel. Overall, very light setup and also very sound in the sense of weight distribution. By placing the engine behind the front axle and also having a DCT in the very back of the car, the weight distribution was near optimal. The SLS was no different from this, aside from the fact that they used the M159 V8 6.2 NA unit, which I kind of like. But if we think about now the new platform and why it's so much heavier, we have the M177 compared to the 9-speed MCT. This is the same transmission that's used in the likes of the E63, GLE63, and so on. In fact, it even borrows the entire layouts. So instead of having the engine behind the front axle, it's now on top of the front axle, which is worse for distribution. Not to mention we have a transfer case as well to transfer power to the front wheels because of 4MATIC. And of course a traditional drive shaft that goes to the back of the car to a normal LSD, limited slip differential, to then send power to the rear wheels. Overall, a much heavier setup, and the weight is not distributed as well as before. So, this is at least part of that 800 pound weight gain, and also why the proportions are a bit strange. If you guys haven't noticed, the front mid-engine layout is what makes the SLS and the AMG GT have that extremely long hood with that massive gap in between the front axle and the driver's cockpit. Compared to the new GT and the new SL, this is not the case. They're more traditional. This setup is shared with, like I said, many other AMGs that currently exist. Pretty much anything with the M17 V8 at the moment has a platform similar to this diagram right here. So essentially, the AMG GT has been reduced to something that one could call an E63 coupe if they ever made it, which they don't, but it kind of is what that is with the higher price tag, if that makes sense. I mean, even the SLR, talking from back in the day, had the M155 V8, which was still mounted behind the front axle. And that car was a boat in terms of how it handled, but it still made an effort to have better weight distribution, plus that price tag was so high you might as well have. But that car still had the transmission mounted directly to the back of the engine, but it was sort of in the middle of the car, so they could call it front mid-engined. The new AMG GT and new SL, not the case. And for one more thing, let's talk about the design of the new GT. I personally think it looks great. I think the front end looks great. It's very Black Series inspired, but in a more composed way. The side profile, it's a 911. The back, it's a 911. I like the taillights though. The taillights are pretty cool. It looks kind of like an evolution of the previous GT, but the silhouette is pure 911, and the problem is, I know AMG's targeting 911 buyers, especially with the silhouette and the rear seats and the comfort, usability, but the problem comes down to the 911 buyer is going to buy a 911. Yes, they may cross-shop with the GT, but if someone is fixing on a 911, they're going to buy a 911, and that's just the end of it, really. The previous GT did have a lot more going for it in terms of what made it special. The new GT, it's, I guess, a more well-rounded car, but did they need to do that when the SL was there? I think no, but the reality is it's cost-cutting. By using one platform for two cars, AMG can maximize the amount of money they make, which is probably what Mercedes wanted them to do. Is it better than a 4-cylinder C63? Yes, of course. Am I still curious to see what variants they produce that make more power? Yes. Will the AMG GTR successor be nearly as cool as the previous one? Probably not, but I'm still curious to see if the Black Series eventually comes out in all the different variants for the next 7 to 8 years. So, we can look forward to that until the combustion engine is dead.
Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
And on that terrible disappointment, I want everyone to go buy this shirt. That's it for this video. See you guys in the next one.